Have you ever stood in a room full of powerful people and realized that the truth makes you the most dangerous person there? That moment came for me on a Tuesday morning, in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom overlooking downtown Austin. Everyone wore suits tailored in places I couldn't pronounce. I wore one I found on sale 2 years ago when I still believed ambition was enough. Across the table, my managing partner, Mark Landon, a man who once graced the cover of a venture capital magazine, looked at me like I'd lost my mind. All I said was, "This platform is a fraud. We can't fund this." It should have been a conversation about due diligence. Instead, it became a loyalty test. My name is Alex Navarro. I grew up fixing tractors and feeding goats on a dusty farm outside Laredo. I got into college on a scholarship and graduated top of my class in finance. 3 years ago, Genesis Capital called me a rising star. Now I was a liability. They told me to sign the investment memo, look the other way, and collect my equity. But some truths don't sit quietly. And I wasn't raised to stay silent. I wasn't supposed to make it out of my hometown. Not really. In Santa Raquel, a dusty town 10 miles from the Mexican border, people grow up fast, and dreams grow small. My mom cleaned houses. My dad fixed diesel engines and farmed a rocky plot of land that fed more goats than people. We didn't have Wi-Fi until I was in high school, but we had books, and I devoured them like oxygen. I studied by candlelight some nights when the power cut out in the summer. When I got into UT Austin on a full ride, my mother cried, not because she was proud, though she was, but because she knew I wouldn't come back the same. She wasn't wrong. At college, I lived on ramen and ambition. I worked nights at the campus help desk and weekends tutoring finance. I wasn't the smartest in the room, but I was the most relentless. I learned everything I could about fintech, blockchain, and how the next generation of wealth was being built, not inherited. After graduation, I landed an internship with a mid-size hedge fund. 6 months later, I was offered a full-time analyst role at Genesis Capital, a rising star in crypto venture funding. They just made headlines for a seed round in a DAO that returned 800%. Everyone at the firm looked like they'd been born into the industry. I was the outlier, the brown kid from nowhere with dirt still under his fingernails. But I earned my seat. I built models no one else could. I predicted liquidity cycles when others were guessing. I stayed late, said little, and made people money. Within a year, I was promoted to senior associate. I started sending money back home, helped my parents fix the roof, paid off my sister's nursing school. Genesis became my life. The stakes were high, but I believed in what we were doing, disrupting old systems, giving retail investors a shot at generational wealth. I thought we were building something that could lift people like my family out of poverty. But then the masks started slipping. The hype around projects didn't match the data. Terms were hidden in tokenomics white papers, audits were skipped, and when I raised questions, the smiles tightened. I had worked my whole life for a seat at that table. What I didn't realize was how expensive it would be to keep it. The project that changed everything came wrapped in the usual buzzwords: community first, decentralized access, frictionless passive income. It was called Yield Trust, and it promised stable 18% annual returns through automated liquidity farming. The founders were 2 charismatic influencers with million-follower Twitter accounts and polished pitch decks. Their seed round had filled in under 48 hours. Now they wanted Genesis to lead the Series A, $25 million up front with another $20 million planned after token launch. At first glance, it looked promising, but when I dug into the fundamentals, red flags popped like landmines. The smart contracts they shared weren't audited. Wallet activity suggested wash trading. The so-called Treasury Reserve was held in anonymous wallets controlled by offshore shell companies. They were manufacturing trust through marketing, not math. More concerning was their target audience. Yield Trust was being promoted in online, spaces that catered to struggling workers, recent immigrants, people in developing countries. Places where the promise of passive income wasn't just attractive, it was life-changing. I brought my concerns to the attention of my team lead, Jenna. She nodded slowly and told me to keep it quiet for now. "Alex," she said, tapping her laptop. This deal puts us in position for Q3 bonuses across the board. We've seen worse deals work out fine. Let's not get moral all of a sudden. I left her office with a stone in my chest. That night, I reran my risk model. Best case scenario, investors might scrape by with break-even returns if token values held and crypto markets stayed bullish. Worst case, a collapse within 18 months. Tens of thousands of small investors would lose everything. The next day, we had a partner meeting. Mark Landon himself walked in, hyped from a podcast he just recorded about financial democratization through tokenized assets. When I voiced my concerns, his smile didn't even flicker. This is frontier tech, Alex. Volatility is the cost of innovation, he said, pouring sparkling water into a whiskey tumbler. I should have backed down right there, but something in me couldn't. These weren't just charts and tokens, these were real people. People like my dad, who once almost lost the farm because someone sold him a faulty loan, wrapped in big words and bad faith. The problem was, in that room, protecting people made you look naive, and at Genesis Capital, naivety was the only sin worse than disloyalty. I didn't sleep that weekend. I kept thinking about the Telegram chats, the Reddit threads, the way Yield Trust marketed itself as a zero-risk solution for passive income. That language wasn't just misleading, it was predatory. I remembered watching my mother clip coupons so we could afford groceries. I thought about how easily someone like her could be convinced to invest a small inheritance or retirement fund into something they didn't fully understand, because someone in a suit told them it was safe. Needed clarity. So I called in a favor from a friend at a crypto forensic firm. She ran some quick blockchain analysis and sent me a 2-line message that confirmed my worst suspicion. You're not paranoid. This is a slow rug. Yield Trust's core wallets had already been quietly liquidating small amounts into Tornado Cash, a privacy mixer often used to obscure large withdrawals. If they were pulling funds before Series A even closed, that meant one thing: the founders weren't building anything. They were preparing to vanish. Monday morning, I requested a one-on-one with Jenna. I showed her everything: transaction trails, unaudited code, internal token inflation projections. She looked at me for a long time, then shut her laptop without saying a word. You need to be careful, Alex, she said quietly. You're not a partner. You're an employee. You start talking like this in the wrong room, and people will stop seeing you as part of the solution. I expected her to challenge my math. Instead, she warned me about my tone. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. I thought maybe I could convince Mark directly. Maybe, if he saw how this would affect real people, not just bottom lines, he'd pull the plug. That Wednesday, I stayed late after hours, caught him as he was wrapping up a Zoom call with another fund. Mark, I just need 5 minutes, I said. There's something you should see. He listened as I walked him through. The wallet flows, the audit gaps, the synthetic staking numbers. I even printed out screenshots. When I finished, he poured himself another drink and gave me a long, unreadable look. You know what your problem is, Alex? He finally said. You still think this industry is about fairness, but it's not. It's about timing. By the time the SEC notices anything, the exit's already happened. The early guys win. The rest, well, they had a chance, didn't they? He set the papers down, folded his hands, and said the words that would echo in my head for weeks. This deal goes through. You're either with us or you're in the way. That was the moment I realized the rules I thought we were playing by, the ones about truth, ethics, and protecting investors, were just for show. They weren't backing a scam by mistake. They were doing it on purpose. The following morning, I walked into the weekly investment committee meeting with a folder in my hand and a decision already made. Inside that folder were printed screenshots, wallet audit summaries, code vulnerabilities, everything. I waited until the agenda hit the Yield Trust proposal, then slid the folder across the table to Jenna. I can't approve this, I said. The data is conclusive. This deal doesn't just carry risk, it guarantees harm. We're facilitating fraud. The room fell silent. Jenna didn't touch the folder. Mark, sitting across from me, leaned back in his chair and smiled. A cold, effortless smile. One I'd seen him give founders just before rejecting their pitch decks. "Alex," he said smoothly, "you're out of line." I held my ground. "I'm not accusing anyone. I'm saying we have a responsibility, legal, ethical, not to fund a project that actively misleads vulnerable people." Mark stood. "You are not the conscience of this firm. You're an analyst. You're here to find angles, not problems." I looked around the room, eyes lowered. No one spoke. These were people I'd admired, even trusted, and not one of them would look me in the eye. Then Mark added almost casually, "Leave your badge with HR. You're done here." I didn't say anything. I didn't beg or argue. I simply nodded and stood, my hands steady even as my pulse roared in my ears. By the time I reached my desk, my email access was already revoked. My company laptop locked out. The equity I'd worked 3 years to earn, frozen pending internal review. I packed my things in silence. Security didn't escort me out, but the message was clear. I'd been erased. On the way down in the elevator, I checked my phone. One new message from an unknown number. "You don't understand who you just crossed. Stay quiet. Stay gone." I stepped into the bright morning sun with a cardboard box in my hands and a 1,000-yard stare. 3 years of work, gone in 60 seconds. All because I told the truth. But I wasn't afraid. Not yet. Because I still thought the worst thing they could do was fire me. I was wrong. I took the long way home that day, driving aimlessly past overpasses and tech campuses through parts of Austin I hadn't seen since college. I didn't know how to explain it to my family, to myself. All I had was a box of office supplies and the sinking feeling that I'd thrown away everything I'd worked for. When I finally pulled into my parents' driveway in Santa Raquel 6 hours later, my father was fixing the well pump behind the house. He didn't say anything when he saw me walk up in dress shoes covered in dust. "Didn't expect you till next month," he said, not looking up. "I got fired," I said quietly. He stopped tightening the bolt, stared at the rusted wrench in his hand, then he said, "You steal something?" "No." "You lie?" "No." "Then you did what you had to do." That was all, but the silence that followed felt heavier than any accusation. Inside the house, my mother was less restrained. "I told your uncle you worked for the best firm in Texas," she said. "Now the whole town will say you were too proud to play the game." At the corner store later that evening, I felt the stares. It was a small town. Word traveled fast. Someone had already told the wrong version of the story. Probably an ex-colleague trying to get ahead of the PR blowback. A neighbor I hadn't seen in years offered a half-hearted smile. "Tough break, mijo," he said. "Maybe next time don't rock the boat, yeah?" I nodded, said nothing, walked away. That night, I sat on the porch with a beer and watched a thunderstorm roll in, over the hills. The wind smelled like mesquite in summer. My mom came out and sat beside me. She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "You were always the one who couldn't look away when something was wrong, even when it hurt you." I didn't respond, because this time, it hurt more than I'd expected. Not just to lose the job, but to feel like the people you love are wondering if maybe, just maybe, you made a mistake. And for the first time, a voice in my head whispered the same question. What if I had? The doubt didn't last long. By Sunday morning, I was sitting at my childhood desk in the back room, same one I'd studied at for my SATs, surrounded by printouts, USB drives, and a rapidly growing spreadsheet labeled Yield Trust Internal, Irregularities. I hadn't left Genesis empty-handed. Weeks before I was fired, I'd started documenting everything. At first, it was just for my own clarity, an insurance policy in case things went sideways. But now it was evidence. Serious, traceable, time-stamped evidence. Internal memos, Slack threads, investment memos marked for eyes only. Wallet tracking reports. I had proof that Genesis knew Yield Trust was operating without audited smart contracts, that the founders were cashing out through synthetic wallets, and that risk models had been deliberately altered to appear favorable. More damning, an email string between Jenna and Mark discussing how to manage perception among limited partners and whether investor disclosures could be adjusted post-transaction. That's when I knew I couldn't let this die quietly. I reached out to Leah Mendoza, a journalist I'd met during a fintech panel the previous year. She wrote for The Capital Wire, a sharp, no-nonsense investigative outlet that covered the underbelly of emerging tech. I didn't give her details, just a question. If I had proof that a major VC firm knowingly funded a fraudulent crypto platform, would you run the story? Her reply came in under 3 minutes. If you have proof, I'll bring the matches. We met in person 2 days later in a cafe 30 miles outside Austin. I handed her a flash drive and a printed summary, with wallet IDs, timestamps, and investor pitch materials. She listened, asked sharp questions, and made no promises, only that she would verify every line. I've been hearing whispers about Genesis for months, she said, sipping bitter black coffee. But no one would go on record. Until now, on the drive home, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Purpose. Not revenge. Not ego. Not even vindication. Just clarity. I wasn't trying to ruin anyone's career. I wasn't even trying to save mine. I was trying to stop a system that was packaging lies in clean UX and calling it freedom. One that used decentralization as a shield while exploiting the very people it claimed to empower. I didn't know how far it would go or how much it would cost, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't backing down. Not this time. The first sign came the following week when a startup I'd been interviewing with suddenly went silent. We'd had 2 promising calls. The hiring manager had all but said the role was mine. Then, nothing. No replies, no thanks but no thanks. Just silence. I assumed they'd moved on. Until a friend in their finance team texted me late one night. Hey man, off the record. Someone from Genesis called our founder. Said you were under internal review for breach of confidentiality. Thought you should know. My stomach turned. That same day, Leah called. Her tone was different, tight, cautious. They know, she said. I haven't published anything, but Genesis, PR is moving fast. They're shopping a narrative that you were fired for insubordination, that you stole proprietary data. One outlet even mentioned personal instability. I laughed bitterly. Personal instability? She didn't laugh back. This is how it works, Alex. They don't sue, they smear. They make you radioactive so no one wants to be near your name. It got worse. An anonymous blog post appeared on Medium a few days later, written under a pseudonym titled, The Dangers of Junior Arrogance in Venture Capital. The subtext wasn't subtle. It mentioned an unnamed associate who had overstepped his role, leaked sensitive data, and showed signs of emotional volatility. Then my LinkedIn profile started getting flooded, with passive-aggressive comments from burner accounts and former colleagues who had never once spoken to me outside of meetings. Even old college friends distanced themselves. One sent a polite message saying, "Hope you're okay. Maybe just step back from the drama for a bit." Back in Santa Raquel, my dad barely used his phone, but even he noticed the change in tone when people spoke to him. Less respect, more suspicion. Like they were trying to calculate whether his son had burned down a fortune or simply gone crazy. I understood the playbook now. They weren't afraid of what I had. They were afraid of what it could become. So they did what powerful people always do, turned the whistleblower into the problem. But I had made my peace with exile, because I knew something they didn't. I wasn't alone anymore. The message came late, buried among job alerts and ignored newsletters in my inbox. Subject line: We need to talk, I saw what you did. The sender was Mira Chen, a name I hadn't heard in months. She was a former data analyst at Genesis, sharp, methodical, and painfully quiet. We'd worked on 3 deals together. She left abruptly 6 weeks before I was fired. No LinkedIn updates, no goodbyes. I replied, "Call me. Anytime." She did. I kept copies, she said flatly, of everything. Smart contract revisions, off-ledger allocations, Slack messages where Jenna and Mark coordinated post-launch wash trades to inflate token value. I sat up. Why? Because I knew what they were doing. I just didn't know if anyone else did. I almost convinced myself it wasn't my fight. Until I saw your name in that blog post. She paused. They're trying to destroy you, Alex. But if we go together, they won't be able to bury us both. We agreed to meet the next morning at a co-working space in San Antonio. Mira arrived with a thumb drive and a small messenger bag. No makeup, no small talk. She opened her laptop and began walking me through a digital trail that made my stomach twist. There were shell wallets feeding fake liquidity pools, false user growth charts submitted to LPs, and even a memo titled Narrative Risk Strategy, outlining how to manage public perception if someone inside the firm leaked documents. They weren't just operating in the gray. They were orchestrating a full-blown fraud operation, one dressed in futurist language and dressed up as innovation. Why? Didn't you go to the authorities yourself? I asked. She looked at me deadpan. Because I needed to know I wasn't crazy. She wasn't, and neither was I. That evening, we looped Leah back in and laid everything out. She brought in a data verification expert to validate timestamps, wallet histories, and chain integrity. Every line checked out. Now we weren't dealing in speculation. We had proof. They'd built an empire on vapor, and marketed it to people who could least afford to lose. Mira stayed late, organizing the files into case folders. As she worked, I looked at her and saw what they'd underestimated from the start. People like us might be quiet. We might be cautious, but we're not afraid of the truth, and we don't back down. Within 10 days, the investigation was no longer ours alone. Leah's editors at the Capital Wire had seen enough. With Mira's data trail, my internal memos, and multiple verified blockchain transactions, they escalated the story to legal counsel and began preparing a full exposé. Simultaneously, Leah submitted the files to the SEC's whistleblower office and a confidential contact at the Department of Justice's Cybercrime Division. What happened next felt surreal. It started quietly. Emails from regulators requesting clarification, document formats, wallet access logs. Then Mira received a call from a federal forensic auditor asking to review the metadata of her smart contract files. These weren't just fact-checkers. These were people who brought handcuffs. A week later, the Yield Trust token collapsed overnight, losing 92% of its value in 24 hours after an anonymous wallet dumped its full holdings. Panic flooded Twitter. Discord servers melted. The founders of Yield Trust, once all over social media, vanished without a trace. But the real earthquake hit the next morning. A leaked report surfaced showing that Genesis Capital itself had been funneling investor funds through shell DAOs registered in Liechtenstein, using interlocking wallets to obscure movement of capital. These DAOs weren't backing startups. They were recycling money, on paper and chain, to simulate success, drive token hype, and inflate internal returns. It wasn't just a bad investment, it was financial laundering on a technical level most regulators barely understood. Mira's documentation exposed the engine. My internal emails proved executive awareness, and the combination painted a picture so clear, even skeptics couldn't look away. By Friday, the Capital Wire ran the headline, Code of Deception, How Genesis Capital Built a Crypto Empire on Bayo. Lies. The article was front-page news on every major tech outlet within hours. Genesis went into full lockdown. Comments disabled. Social channels wiped. Their website redirected to a maintenance page. Mark Landon released a statement denying all wrongdoing, then deleted it an hour later. Behind the scenes, the SEC launched an official probe. Subpoenas were issued. Wallets were frozen. Investors began filing lawsuits. One pension fund from Illinois claimed it had lost over $30 million through indirect exposure to Genesis-backed tokens, but none of it shocked me. What did surprise me was the call I received late that night from someone I hadn't spoken to in nearly 2 years. Ravi. Deceit, a partner at Halberd Ventures, a firm that once co-invested with Genesis. I read the story. He said, I remember how they treated you. We've got a list of funds trying to distance themselves from the fallout, but I don't think they should forget who warned them first. I didn't say much. I just closed my laptop, stared into the dark, and let it sink in. They thought they'd ended me, but all they'd done was give me a platform. The storm didn't pass. It changed direction. In the weeks following the expose, Genesis Capital unraveled like wet thread. Multiple partners resigned. The firm's offices in Austin and New York were raided by federal agents. Mira and I were both formally interviewed by the SEC, then asked to provide statements in a multi-agency investigation. We weren't just witnesses anymore. We were whistleblowers. But this time, the word didn't feel like exile, it felt like truth, and people noticed. A month after the article broke, I received a call from the Center for Digital Ethics and Finance, a nonprofit advisory group working with state regulators to create policy for decentralized platforms. They wanted me to join as a strategic consultant to help design frameworks that could prevent the kind of abuse Genesis had perfected. I accepted. For the first time in years, I wasn't just analyzing numbers or writing memos for someone else's portfolio. I was helping shape rules that could protect people like my parents, my neighbors, and millions of others from ever falling into these traps. Back in Santa Raquel, the narrative began to shift. My mom clipped the article from the Austin American-Statesman and pinned it to the fridge. "Local son stands up to crypto corruption," the headline read. My dad said nothing, but one evening while checking the fences, he muttered, "Took guts," then walked away like it meant nothing. It meant everything. Mira accepted a role as lead forensic analyst for a blockchain transparency initiative backed by MIT and the UN. We still talk every week, less about evidence, now more about what comes next. And Leah, she won a National Journalism Award. Her editor told her it was the most viewed investigation in the Capitol Wire's history. Sometimes justice doesn't come with a round of applause. It comes quietly, in the form of peace. I still get job offers, a few from firms that once ghosted me. I politely decline, because I didn't fight this hard just to go back. I fought to move forward. And now, I finally am, not richer, not more famous, but freer. Free to tell the truth and free to build something that lasts. This time, with my name on it. People still ask me if I regret it, walking away from a career most people only dream of, taking on a billion-dollar firm, losing my reputation before I could defend it. My answer is always the same. I didn't lose my career. I found my voice. The truth is, technology isn't good or bad, it's just a tool. What matters is who holds it and who it's built to serve. Crypto could have been a revolution for working people, for single moms investing $500 in hopes of a better future, for retirees trying to outpace inflation, but it became something else in the wrong hands. A playground for the powerful, dressed in the language of freedom. We don't fix that by staying silent. We fix it by speaking up, especially when it's hardest. If you've ever seen something that didn't sit right and stayed quiet, I get it. But if you spoke up, if you risked something to do what's right, tell me about it. I'd like to hear your story too. Drop it in the comments below. Someone else might need to hear it today. And if this story resonated with you, share it. Quiet voices only change the world when enough of them rise together.